All right, excellent. Well, happy Sunday, everyone. My name is Alan French, and I have the pleasure of hosting the first edition period of review today. I've been a first edition player since back in 1994, and the CC in first edition is something that I'm very, very passionate about. So thank you so much for having me here today, and I'll pass it over to the team that will be answering questions to provide introductions. Charlie?
Sure. My name is Charlie Plain. I'm the acting first edition brand manager.
Excellent. John?
My name is John Carter. I am the 1E Rules Master. I'm also here able to answer some questions about errata.
Wonderful. And then Pat?
Hi, I'm Paddy Ty, K's on Pad on the forums. I'm the 1E creative manager and also worked on Broken Bow that released this year.
Excellent. All right. So now I'm going to, I have the chat room up for any real-time questions that come in. Our head of errata, Matt Zeno, was not able to make it today, but I do have a couple of responses that I can read that he provided answers to in advance of this. So if we just jump in, one of the questions that actually came up a couple of times throughout the first edition period of review thread was the question around the absence of a public call for a creative manager when Super Dave retired, and wanted to put that out there for any comment or discussion.
Charlie, as the guy who should have been interviewing, do you want to tackle it?
Sure. In hindsight, we probably should have posted a public call. I think that the model moving forward for things like that, obviously we wanted. Sorry. So we ended up hiring Patty because he was on the team already. I don't think that was secret. And it makes a lot of sense to elevate someone to the leadership role when the leadership role becomes vacant. However, I do think that we probably should have posted a public, hey, we're looking for this position, to let anyone who wanted to apply. I think for a lot of like state jobs and so forth, or even other jobs at companies, they do something where they say like, an internal candidate is being considered for this position. So to let people know that like there are people that want to do this job that are already on that existing team, but that shouldn't preclude people from applying. So I think moving forward, all positions that open up will go through a public posting to allow people to apply, even if there is an internal candidate that is interested in the position. So I apologize if someone wanted that position and did not get the chance to apply. I think it was just we had somebody and we wanted to move and get it done. So in the future, I think we'll make sure we post those.
I would say that Zefno, who is probably second behind me in experience in the creative team, he instantly threw his weight behind me going forward as manager. So I'm not entirely sure there would have been that many more applicants from the internal team anyway. So
excellent. Great. Another question, and this one is a little bit more focused on design, came in with regards to any design philosophy, pro or con dual personnel or dual affiliation personnel. And I think would love to hear any additional thoughts from folks that have been on design teams.
I have no objection to dual personnel. I'd love to see more of those, assuming that Art has no issue with the template.
I think one of the things that's also come up is the decision between dual personnel or personas of personnel, and because they kind of end up representing some of the same functions. And so currently design, I think, is leaned towards personas to make the decks a little more unique and give unique flavors rather than personnel who can kind of slide across them.
I know that I don't know that there's like a hard and fast philosophy. I mean, the CC has made at least one dual personnel, Sergei and Helena. They're really just a lot of complexity overhead, and I understand that there are people that like them and there are advantages to them, but like really the reason I feel like the reason dual personnel exist was a kind of a marketing strategy. It was like, you know, I forget what product they appeared in. It was one of the
Fajo.
Enhanced Premier as well, yeah.
Yeah, it was Enhanced Premier is what I was thinking, where it's like, we need to jam some star power in here, but we only have 3 slots worth of cards or whatever, so let's make, you know, 5 characters on 3 cards type of thing. Just, I think that the value, that they're also incredibly hard to power balance. You know, how do you, because it's 1 card, but it's 2 personnel, so how do you figure that out? And it's, I think just complexity and power reasons, we've largely stayed away from them. I think if there was a character where it made sense to make a dual personnel, like I think Sergei and Helena, and I think the mistake we made on that card was making them personas, because now I think at some point we have to make both of the other ones, which is kind of silly. But like, if you have a pair of characters like that only ever appeared together, I think that you could make a dual personnel. I know there's a lot of people clamoring for DS9 duels. And maybe if we found the right product for them, maybe if we made like an enhanced DS9 type of product or something, we could make. I think people just want to see Quark and Odo on the same card. So I guess we're just kind of not doing them for the sake of doing them. If there was a good reason to make them, I would like to see us make them, but I don't want to make them just to say we've done it. I think that's poor reasons to make most design decisions. As for dual affiliation, I think we've backed off on it slightly, because towards the end of 1E, Decipher was just slapping 2 affiliation icons on everybody and their brother. I know the only thing that we have consciously chosen to back off from is / non-aligned dual cards. Every now and then you need to make them, but like making a ton of them, like happened with Voyager, just leads to problems. So, dual affiliation, thumbs up. Dual personnel, if the time and product was right. I think that's our official stance on it. In that I just made that up. So.
Well, speaking as a fan, I think Sisters of Duras was the very first dual personnel card that came out in Fajo. And the cool factor, again, simply speaking as a fan, was absolutely awesome, just because it was new and it was so fitting to that particular set of personnel. So nice to hear, again, selfishly, that there isn't an official stance against it, but that, the Trek sense and design will kind of guide that personally.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if we were going to make them, I would want them to be that cool. You know, yeah. I'd want it to be, here's an exciting card represented as a dual personnel, not just pick 2 people and put them on a card.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it is fun, especially with like a Sergei and Helena and the introduction of Café des Artistes. I mean, it's been nice to see that card get a bit more, utilization. Because you have a romantic partner right there on a single card, which is fun.
That's downloadable as well.
Exactly. Good old support personnel. All right. So actually, now that we're on the topic of cards, one of the another theme that came up in a couple of different posts throughout the first edition area was the question around block and off block cards. And with the Holiday Warp Pack just having been released not too long ago, and a lot of really positive buzz on the forums around that, any additional thoughts in terms of the philosophy around block, or more specifically, greater off-block products?
I personally think that this year the two main sets that we've seen have been heavily focused. Obviously, the Vulcans needed to get a lot of the Vulcans in, and they're largely all from, well, the personnel are all from Enterprise. Kolinar obviously was an example of a card that was non-block, was from not from an Enterprise source, so it was slightly different. With Broken Bow, we had the Makos and the 22nd Century Klingons to try and bulk out, so there wasn't a lot of space on either of those products for extra stuff. But I think outside of 2016, right at the very end of the year, we've got Cold Front coming, and I think there's probably going to be a bit more non-block theme stuff in there. I'm sure Charlie will explain more about that at some point. And obviously at the trail end of 2016, we'd had the 50th anniversary as well.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, we did the going from the DS9 block into the mirror block. We had a survey which we had promised to have after the second year of 3, where we were like, "Hey, what do you guys want?" And people largely liked what we were doing. They just wanted to see more non-block content. So, starting with the mirror block, which the mirror block was largely underway at the time that survey was happening, so there wasn't a lot of time to read. I think the third set in that block in particular had some. It was tough because right at the time people were telling us they wanted more non-block content. We were entering into a series of really 3 sets in a row that needed to be very heavily focused. Mirror Starfleet needed a lot of time and attention, and we tried. Like the Terran Empire design team had a lot of extra stuff in there that ended up having to get pulled out for space.
I think Through the Looking Glass had a sub theme in there which got pulled as well, and that was particularly sort of outside of the mirror block.
Yeah, so we tried, and it ended up not working. Either there was problems with the cards in testing, or they just ended up, it fit better in another place. And then, Starfleet, the first set of Starfleet block had a lot, and Vulcans obviously took a lot. But we listened. It's just I think it's taking time to get to that point. I mean, Kolinar, that whole deck basically exists because people said they wanted non-block content. Like, we probably wouldn't have made that deck if that hadn't have been the feedback that we got. I mean, if people are upset at the volume, I can certainly understand that. Because if you look at the last year and a half, it's really been like 50th anniversary and the Holiday Warp Pack as non-block sets. That being said, I think we're actively working in ways to get more non-block content out there, and really all the expansions are made to deal for here are options for block play, and then here are options for complete play too. And they're especially Cold Front. You guys will be very happy. There's a lot of stuff in there that is not block specific at all, and there's a lot of stuff in there that really doesn't work in block or only barely works in block. And then all of the TOS block, which we're kind of right now, design-wise, is very going to be different, specifically because of that feedback.
And project accommodation as well. That's that's non-block as well.
Yeah, that's the other. We have Project Discommodation, which is the end cap to the 2E compatible cards. We have TNG remastered stuff coming as part of the Learn to Play intro series. The dual decks that are going to be part of that series won't be block based, but they will still play in block. And then, we have a couple other littler projects coming over the next year or so that are entirely designed not to be in block. So I ask you to just give us a little patience. We are sensitive to that feedback. We are making changes. And judge us in 1 year based on how much we've done. Because really the stuff that's coming out now is the stuff that we put into place entirely after that conversation was had. So.
Great. And that actually segues nicely into another question. You had mentioned the TNG block starter refreshers. One question from the forums had to do with the heyday of the next generation, circa 2013, 2014. I remember on the forums back there, there was actually this vote that was put up, which was, when was the golden era of first edition, and the highest ranking option was now, right? With TNG block coming out, everybody was viewing the golden age of first edition as, what we were living at the time. There has been, there's been some changes since the TNG era, and in terms of first edition popularity, playing of block events between 2013, 2017. The question here was, has the CC, spent any time thinking about what was happening back in the TNG block era, and are there any learnings that we might be able to take away from that moving forward?
Said I feel like I'm going to talk too much, so I'm just going to not talk until I'm called out.
Charlie.
I mean, it's an odd situation, right? Because I think that that some of the beautiful simplicity of TNG has fallen off over the past few years. Not deliberately. Well, in a way, it was deliberately, because we got a lot of feedback towards the end of the TNG block that things were boring, that they weren't complex enough. And then as soon as we made it, and then I think Emissary came out and swung it too far over to the pendulum, and then it was like, over time, everybody's looking back at TNG going like, "Oh, that was the heyday. It was so simple. It was nice." But really, back at the time, I don't remember that Golden Age poll that you're referencing. I can believe it, but I think that there's a lot of rose-colored glasses looking back at TNG right now, because when we first announced that, there was a lot of negativity. Like, the whole concept drew a lot of negativity from people, and then they played it, and then they liked it, and then there was a lot of negativity about, oh, this is too good, and it's too simple, and it's too easy, and it's not 1E anymore. And then we swung the other way, and now it's, anyway, not to point fingers. We are aware of the fact that TNG block was sort of an aspirational goal for a lot of people. That's exactly why we're doing a TNG remastered type of product to allow you to play in that environment at local levels, with updated starter decks and a slightly refreshed card pool. We have to do a lot of work on our infrastructure to make that easier for people, but that's something that's happening. And then one of the mantras of the TOS blocks design teams is, remember TNG, for lack of I don't know exactly how it's phrased, but like we're trying to be deliberately conscious of recapturing some of that simplicity in block. Like we're making an active effort. Spoilers. We're making an active effort to not use time locations in the TOS block, which is unusual, but that's a level of complexity that we're all kind of like taking for granted right now. So let's just not include those, and then once the motion pictures block comes out, all the time locations will be gone out of block, for example. They'll still be available to you in complete play. Obviously, we're not going to be like prohibiting time locations, but like that's just not a thing that we need to have in block play, so we're not going to include it. So.
Okay. All right, and along those same lines, a couple of folks asked questions about, given the limited time that we all have, as more and more life responsibilities get in our way, is there any thought put toward making the actual organized play a little bit simpler? And I know that the CC has just recently retired a couple of formats outside of OTF. So I think the question here was, are there any additional formats that are being looked at to make to make play more accessible and easier?
I think with the TNG starter refresh, one thing we're going to look at there is making a specific TNG block easier and more accessible. So that is one thing we are considering. No promises. But...
Okay.
Yeah, I think the main thing that we can do is make it easier for people to play in these limited formats. Like a complaint that I hear a lot is like, it's hard for me to figure out what cards are in block. So I think that we could improve some technology to the point where, maybe if you go into the deck builder and you say, I'm building a block deck, it just hides all of the cards that aren't available to you.
Mm-hmm.
So you never even see them. So like while you're working, you can't make that mistake,
Yep.
It's a problem that we largely have to deal with. 2E is launching Project Excelsior, which is going to have a limited card pool, and like there has to be if there is not an easy way for people to tell easily what cards are in and what cards are out, and to build their decks easily, those formats will be dead immediately. They'll be, for that reason, is that people don't have time. One other thing that I think that we can do aside from formats is more precons. So I think, like, starting with Live Long and Prosper, one of the things that we did is the design team was required to, after the set was out, put out an article focusing on like all of the different decks you could build. Not all of them, but like, here's a Spies deck, and here's a Dissidents deck, and here's a all Vulcan deck. I think as we move forward, if all of our expansions are coming with, here's an article explaining how these cards were designed, here's a deck, and here's thoughts on how that deck works. Somebody who's like, okay, I read that looks cool, I'll copy that deck, I'll make a couple personalization tweaks and print it, is a way, that's basically a precon then, right? So it's like, I want to try these new cards, I don't really have time to dive into it, so I'll take, Dan's Cold Front deck, and I'll print it, and I'll take it to a tournament, and at least I've got, a deck that's the lion's share of the research has been done for me. So I think we'll do more of that. Plus the dual decks that we're working on are supposed to be that too. Like one of the design goals of the dual decks is like, you can print one of those off and take it to a tournament and do well with it. So
beautiful. Here's a question for John. This has to do with errata, and there was recently a topic posted in the forums around sort of hindsight and errata do-overs. And the question here was, with the positive insights posted in that thread, is this something that we'll look at actually implementing, or you would look at actually implementing in the future, taking the feedback there and making the changes?
Absolutely, I'm sure it's being talked about by the errata team, and there have been errata made off of suggestions on the board before. I can't think of specific examples offhand, but I know that it's happened, and so that type of thread is good for looking back at those and kind of continuing the conversation about that. Like, I can't speak to if like Matt has a plan to like put together an errata set, almost make an errata set of like the things we needed to fix, but I do know there's a lot of things going through testing always, and so anytime a good idea comes up, it at least gets talked about.
Beautiful. And Matt, in in his absence, had provided a response as well, which is 100% in line with that. He said, he welcomes ideas from any direction, and the errata team will continue considering suggestions made in that thread, such as amnesty for certain banned cards and re-errata for balancing. And he wanted to let folks know from a little spoiler perspective that a Macerata of the Enterprise Collection is already in process. So cheers to that.
One last thing is, like, I specifically started that thread as a thought experiment. It says it right in the title, so people should not be getting overly excited to see those things happening soon. This wasn't a nefarious plan to pressure people into doing these things. It was just a, hey, let's have a conversation in hindsight and see what lessons there are to be learned, not me, passive aggressively nudging Matt into doing anything. Just managing expectations, okay? It was not a commitment to do anything with those cards.
Excellent.
Also, I was texted during this review from Chris, well, via his wife, that 4 years ago there was a filter implemented for black cards in the deck builder. So Chris has already done that. Apparently, we've done a terrible job of telling people about that, but that is a thing that already exists. So
Excellent.
I wanted to let Chris off the hook on that one because it's not on him.
Check out the block filter in the deck builder. And I think that there's a CC 10th anniversary deal going on as well, which is a nice timing. A question actually just came in, and the question is, an individual is a little concerned about some of the directions that first edition might be taking from a philosophy standpoint, and that it might represent too much change in the future with regards to how the game is currently played. Is there anything that folks on this broadcast would be able to share that might alleviate someone's fears that the future direction of first edition is headed in a direction that is going to be fundamentally different than first edition has historically been, and whether or not, if anything like that were to be pursued, there would be a vote kind of publicly before decisions are made that it's difficult to go back from?
I don't know how to address that question. No offense to the asker, but it's very vague. Like, when he might be going in a direction that I don't like, I don't know how to address that concern. Like,
yeah, I kind of need to know more specifics as to what they were talking about, but I'm probably one of the ones who doesn't want to see massive changes to the game. I kind of like things as they are.
So, and maybe that's a way to just kind of rephrase it. I'm trying to do it justice while respecting anonymity. And I guess the gestalt of it that I'm kind of reading is, before there's any kind of dramatic change in terms of what first edition represents, would there be an opportunity for the community to weigh in? And would that be taken into consideration before any of these kinds of decisions are made? With the knowledge, as you were saying, Charlie, that a lot of the decisions that are made now aren't felt for like a year from now, just given development timelines and things like that.
Again, I don't understand what this person is worried about. Like, we're making 1E and nobody is interested in like changing 1E into a different game. So like, if this person is a playtester or someone behind the scenes and doesn't like something that they're seeing, they have channels to convey that information. Like, I'm sorry, but asking a super vague question on the period of review doesn't help me. Like, all it's going to do is raise paranoia that there's something coming that isn't coming. Like, in my mind, looking at what's coming down the road, we don't have anything drastic coming for 1E. I mean, maybe there's something I'm missing. And trust me, there are so many 1E staff members that fight me tooth and nail on everything that I try to do. There's nothing that could come out.
I'm one of them.
But like, even the weird stuff that I'm trying to do isn't fundamentally different from how 1E plays. It's different, but that's kind of design's job, is to come at the game in different angles and like make people think about things in different ways. Like, this whole weird stuff that I'm doing with TOS, people are I mean, it's not 1E though. It's just thinking at 1E. It's coming at 1E in a different way, and I don't think that's inherently bad. And even that's getting fought tooth and nail from people.
Yeah, I think the comment I would throw on there is that there are, as Charlie said, plenty of people backstage who ask 1.5 million questions all the time to keep things in the spirit of 1E. But two, if there are specific things you think are like a design or rules or other philosophy, feel free to PM any one of us in the period of review to get a more specific answer and make us aware of what you think the problem is. And 3, I think as long as we still see a world where more traditional decks are competitive, it's a good sign that the game philosophy isn't fundamentally changing. The game universe is just expanding, because I think, and I think testing does a good job of trying to keep those types of balance. Like, I can still run my 2 headquarters Romulus deck just fine, as well as I did 5 years ago, and it's just as competitive. And so that's a good sign that, for the most part, the game is still operating under the same game type principles. There's just new and different mechanics that create alternatives.
Beautiful. All right.
Sorry. One last thing. I didn't really answer what seemed to be the crux of your question is I do not see a world in which every time we want to do something, we go to the public and ask if it's okay, because that way lies complete and utter chaos. That means nothing happens, basically. And I hope everybody understands that I'm not trying to say that out of disrespect or like out of insult. We can't ask every decision. However, we are going to constantly be checking in with the public and taking the temperature of where they are and where they want the game to go. Like, that's where this whole let's get back to sort of TNG thing is coming from, is like the public clearly said, we want to see some simpler stuff. Okay, we'll do that. You know, regularly we're going to have polls and surveys to ask, do you guys like what we're doing? Do you like where we're headed? And community feedback is vital and constant, but it can't get to the point where it's like, what do you guys think about this change to this playtest card? We just can't do that. And I have a feeling this will be used out of context, and I'll get lambasted for it. But community involvement is important, but because of the size of the community and the number of projects that we have to be there has to be a couple layers of abstraction to it.
Definitely. And yeah, and not to editorialize, but as you know, a member of that community, I've certainly appreciated that the CC has seemed to reach out when it came to launching a new affiliation and what folks wanted to see there, and do we continue with blocks? So it would seem that when it comes to some of these bigger questions, there definitely is a formal forum, or has been historically. Speaking only for myself. Another question from the forums is how would you all define success for first edition block?
At the minute, I define it as seeing it played more.
Well, we had a staff meeting last weekend, and we had actually talked about this specific thing because all of the metrics that we have access to are showing a precipitous drop in block popularity in terms of being played. So, an objective definition of block, tournaments is I don't have one. I mean, we could probably develop a metric, but I feel like we would know if block is popular because it's played. Like, I don't know what percentage of tournaments need to be block to call that a success. It's probably not a super high percentage. And I'm going to make an appeal to the public. Here's the thing about block: is for years we have heard anecdotal evidence that block is very popular in kitchen table games and casual play games. And that's awesome if that's true. That was one of the main reasons we made it. However, at this point, the public tournament record for block play has dropped to the point where we need to seriously consider if we should still support it. Which, if it's true that there are a lot of people out there that are playing block casually, now is the time for you to tell us, to come on the forums and post and share your thoughts, to consider making your tournaments public. And I think that the CC can support that by doing, and then we'll talk about this in the OP, POR and stuff, but like, I think that the CC can support casual play more. Right now, we really don't. But if you are out there and you're listening to this and you play block, or you have friends that play block, or you know of somebody in your area that plays block, or you know of somebody not in your area that you met in a Lackey game once, and they told you they play block a lot, we need to hear from them. Because as of right now, by every metric that we can think of, block is not succeeding. block tournaments aren't happening, block events aren't being run. Block as a tournament format, I should say.
Conversely, we don't know that the opposite is true, and that block has essentially served its purpose. People have evolved from block to OTF. We don't know that either.
Well, one question that kind of goes back to the earlier conversation around, TNG is it block as a format, or is it the content of what block happens to be at that point in time?
That's also a very valid point in that if the people that were playing block feel that block has passed them on in complexity, they may have just stopped playing, and we want to hear from you too. If you have played block or are playing block anytime from TNG to now, please tell us. Please get on the forums and let us know. Start a thread, send a PM, do something, because we need to know why you stopped. And if it's complexity reasons, then I'm hopeful that the next 2 years, I should say, we had another 3-year plan. It was going to be 22nd Century, TOS, motion pictures. That's going to happen. Those sets are already in various stages of production. That is going to be a thing. Past that, whether design continues in that model or not is a different discussion that we will have. Block as an OP entity, though, isn't necessarily tied to that. But if it was complexity, hopefully the next 2 years gives you those people that stop playing a reason to start playing in. If it was, I only liked TNG, the TNG entry point will still use block rules. It would just be a different card pool. It would be like OTF with TNG block as your card pool type of thing. We can do the same sort of rebalancing for DS9 if there's a desire in the future. Or if, as Patty said, block has served its purpose and all these groups that were playing it are now playing regular tournaments, we need to know that too. So ultimately, I think that there is a need for a simpler format out there, simpler card pool format out there. And if block isn't it anymore, then we'll have to obviously look for something else. But we need more data, basically, because by all of the metrics that we have, by tournament attendance, by number of tournaments, by decks built, block is not succeeding. So if you have a desire in correcting that interpretation, then please pass the word along and have that happen. To be fair, it's not like we're canceling block next Friday if people don't reply. It's not going to be that dire, but please spread the word and get that information into our hands.
Beautiful. And this was actually one part of a 5-part question that I think you answered 4 out of the 5 parts. The one part that wasn't explicitly answered was, and that I haven't asked until now, is who is accountable for first edition block's success? Oh.
I don't think I understand the question. What do you mean by accountable?
So it's the series of question is, how would you define success in block? Has success been achieved? And then if it hasn't been achieved, or if it has been achieved, who's accountable for that? So I think I'm reading this as, given the precipitous drop-off of block events, who's involved in fixing, addressing, identifying issues and implementing changes.
Okay, I understand. I would argue that block was a success and it has now stopped being a success. And it is the CC's responsibility not to continue investing a ton of resources in something that isn't being used. However, good or bad, you can see how long it took us to get rid of revised and standard. They're still technically around through the end of the year. So it's on us to take action if block is not succeeding. The decision on whether we should, revamp it or eliminate it will be something that the community will be involved in. So we're all going to be accountable for it, because we're not gonna just sit on the contrary to what some people believe. It isn't like a dictatorship where we sit around in a secret cabal meeting and tell people what to think about Winnie. We're gonna ask the community. It's like, hey, should we spend more resources trying to get this back to where it was, or should we let it go? That'll be a decision that we all make together. So.
All right. Thank you. Another question from the forums. Why has the first edition brand manager position not been posted yet?
Because I have not found, as the acting first edition brand manager, I have not found the responsibilities to be distracting enough or overwhelming enough to need to bring someone on full time. I'm actually finding it to be one of the more enjoyable parts of my job. Patty and John can speak to how I'm doing, but it's a complicated. There are more complexities to the answer, and I don't want to lead people to inferences that aren't there. But brand management is a difficult job that is different than most people think it is. And I apparently, as the chairman, as the person writing the job descriptions, have not done a good job communicating to candidates what is involved in being a brand manager. So some of the candidates who have been brand managers in the past have found themselves disappointed. Some of that is on me, some of that is on the requirements, but in the interests of not going through a search and then bringing someone on and having them get disappointed again, until I have sort of cracked that obstacle, there are two things that need to happen. Either I figure out how to articulate what the requirements of the job are, so I'm comfortable posting it again, or it's too much work and it's too distracting for me. If either one of those things become true, I will post the position. But right now, neither one of those things are true. So, but if as part of this review, people are thinking that I'm not doing a good job or I'm not putting enough time into it, I want to hear that too, because if the third factor is the community doesn't want me to do it. The community and the staff does not want me to do it, which is valid. Maybe they don't. But I'm enjoying it, and I like to think I'm doing a good job. I'll let Patty and John address that. But that's the reason why. Those are the reasons why.
I think things are working at the minute. Charlie is doing a good job, in my opinion. I think one of the main things is the communication between the various team members, and Charlie is doing a good job of coordinating that, which is good. And when things do occasionally slip, either myself or John will give him a nudge when necessary, and it's working fine at the minute. I don't know if John's got anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think what I can speak to is 1E has had a better sense of timeline and deadlines and cross-group communication than it has had in a while. Probably since I've been here, although I'd say about half the time I was here was under weird transitions of brand managership, as it has been a weird place in the 1E world. But yeah, there's been more communication in the last 6 months or so about what needs to be done when, what we're planning to do when, coordinating teams, etc. And in that sense, I think you are going to see not only the design schedule stay relatively consistent, but more interesting things coming from like 1E design or new types of boutique products, etc., where you have a brand manager with a clear vision of what is the goal of 1E in the upcoming future.
Excellent, and I know that we're coming up on 10 minutes left here. I think that the look to the future actually speaks directly to the next question, which was, have there been any preliminary unofficial talks about what's on the horizon after Project Gikar and Londo?
Jakar, for all Babylon 5 fans out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we have another block after that. It's the Hope. It's the Star Wars block. Hope, Empire, and Jedi. Those are going to be, that's the motion pictures block. So Delenn, Jakar, and Londo will be TOS. And then Hope, Empire, and Jedi will be classic films. Weird middle set that is like all of the movies sort of transitioning from classic films to TNG. And then the third set will be TNG leaning towards Nemesis. If we add some sort of like weird abstraction on top of that, it hasn't been figured out yet. We're just now putting people to the sets. But yes, after that, beyond that, there isn't much. I have ideas, I have thoughts, but again, we're going to need to do a large public conversation before we get too far down the road. So I have in particular in mind one expansion that I want to do after those three that would be entirely non-block based, even if block is still a thing at that point. That will be really, really, really fun. I think I even have a code name for it. I'll give you a super, super, super early hint. The code name would be TARDIS.
Heard it here first.
A copy of my T-shirt.
Excellent. So I'm just going to check to see if there's anything else in the chat rooms. I know that we're rapidly running out of time here. Maybe just
you can go long on my account if you want. So I'll stay here all day. So.
All right. There are a couple of additional questions. I'm trying to be thoughtful around specificity or lack thereof to try to get to the heart of things. So thank you all for bearing with me. One of the questions here was around the approach to designing a new set. So I think this goes, very, very specifically to design, and how do you balance, meeting the themes of what the block has been outlined as versus, looking back at different deck types and new deck types and trying to balance them all together so that new cards and old cards and deck types continue to be competitive against one another.
That's a fantastic question, given that Patty and John have both recently worked on their first set or are working on their first set, and I'm sure can provide valuable insights.
I'd say for Broken Bow, most of the focus there was on getting the 22nd century decks right. We weren't, because it was the first set of the block. There wasn't as much of an emphasis on the non-block or going back and fixing other things. There were elements that were also tied in with the previous set with the Makos. So there was elements that filtered across the two. When I previously worked on the 50th set, we sort of took a lot of a wider view for those individual cards and thought what could help this deck. And for example, with the Nemesis card, we had the Remus mission, and I'd recently played at the time the double headquarters Romulans, and I've never been a fan of things like Handshake, and one thing I was thinking, like, this could use some alternatives for draw decks, so hence why we got the download in there of the process or mining and so forth. So it does vary depending on which set you're working on, and there's definitely a bigger emphasis on taking a wider view on sets that aren't particularly focused on a strong theme. But there's always scope for getting a few bits in there. I managed to slip in a few Borg cards for Broken Bow just to give some of the tools back that were being taken away in Errata. So certain objectives that had always been downloaded in the past, where the Errata, I think it was I can't remember the name of the card. It's got the
Established
Borg
Factor Lock and Post Garrison.
Yeah, those sort of things. So those were being sort of given back through. Well, not so much Post Garrison, because that was the one I think that was causing an issue. But
a change of
things like
plans.
Established Factor Lock. Yeah, a change of plans. That's one.
Yeah.
So the drones were given skills that helped counter that. So kept the overall functionality of those decks in place.
I think the other thing that's important there is, like, I've been working on discommendation, and so we've been just looking at like what types of 2E cards let you do things that otherwise weren't allowed. And the play testers are really important, I think, in the answer to that question, right? That the more vibrant play test groups we have, and we're doing, I don't know how compared to the past we're doing, but I think we're doing okay-ish in 1E right now in play test groups. They are doing good work to just see like what decks does this let come off the shelf or tie into, and the more playtest groups we have, giving us their full reports, the easier it is to make sure that we're making well-rounded things that cover a wide part of the game, because those groups are essential to actually testing what's happening with the design when it hits the ground, but before it comes out.
Absolutely, playtesting is essential, and they are the lifeblood of our team.
Cheers to that. All right. Thank you so much for that context. And actually, that goes nicely to the next question, which is actually, to what extent is first edition design paying attention to some of the recent complaints about second edition design? And I'll have to, there isn't much more context that I can provide there. I don't really know what's going on that side of the fence.
Wait, there's a second edition?
Yeah, exactly.
Never heard of it. What is this thing?
I mean, I think the first edition design team is reasonably cognizant of some of the big questions, like the speed of the game. In fact, I think in a large chunk, first edition games are as fast as they've been in a while, because you have a lot of decks that move quickly in a lot of different ways. And as for the other concerns that are out there about second edition, I don't know what they are. I only sometimes read the 2E boards because I don't understand the game.
Well, one of the things that I'm trying to get established, and it's difficult. Schedules are always difficult, but I'm trying to get a regular sit down between myself and Ross, who's the 2E brand manager. Just like a monthly hour and a half meeting where we just sort of compare notes on schedules and common issues. So we can talk about things like this. But I mean, I read the forums all the time. We all read the forums quite a bit. We try not to let, like, if the play, because the players are dissatisfied with something in second edition does not mean that the players are going to be dissatisfied with that in first edition. And I think it's very important that we recognize the two games are different, the two communities are different, and they're doing different things. For example, a common complaint on the 2E side is that there's too much downloading. In 1E, that may or may not be true, but the contexts are completely different. Especially with the the general quarters rule now baked into OTF. I mean, in a way, it's taken the throttle off downloading cards. Like we were very hesitant to make downloads for a while because there was an awful lot of it. Like Delta Quadrant decks, you could download 30 personnel on your second turn. I'm much more willing to make a card that says, download a card once each turn now because there's a built-in throttle, at least in OTF. In Open, it's chaos, go crazy,
But we love that.
But yeah, and I love that that's a thing. But like, I'm okay with there being 3 cards on the table that say once each turn you may download a blah, because you are only going to get to use one of those every turn. Right? There's a built-in throttle, so that sort of takes the shackles off 1E design and lets you make a few more downloads because it makes more interesting choices. Now you have to be careful that you don't make it so that a player can build a deck with 15 cards that download cards and can only use one a turn, because that's frustration. But like putting 3 in your deck is an interesting choice, because it's, well, which one of these do I need? Which one of these do I want to, how do I balance my deck so that, I'm using these? Or like, how do I balance my deck so like, okay, well, first turn I need to defend homeworld, and second turn I need to support personnel, and third turn I need to go do this. Like, it's stretching out the choices, which I think is interesting. So context is king. Context is for kings. Is that the quote? I think context is for kings here. Like, we have to be sensitive about what players are not liking about 2E, because that may overlap first edition. But again, just because there's a criticism about 2E doesn't automatically translate to that criticism being the same in first edition.
Well said. All right, and just as we start to look at the last question here too, what are the chances that we do see a Porthos of Borg anytime in the near future?
See, here's the thing. I could give an answer to this question based on rational thought and logic and Trek sense. But see, there's this guy, his name is Dan Hammond, and he really likes it when I do that, because he makes it his life's mission to circumvent what I just said. For example, I made a definitive statement about a card a while ago. This ability will never be made again in first edition. And so I get a message from Dan halfway through testing on Coldfront. Hey, remember when you said that this will never happen again? Go look at this card. And it's the same thing that I said we'll never ever do again. Now, it didn't make it into the set, but that's besides the point. Dan likes to make cards that do what I say we can never ever do. So what I will say to the question about could we ever see a Porthos of Borg, and I'll be like, it is a wide world of Star Trek, and in some universe, I am certain that dog was assimilated by the collective. Maybe we will visit that universe at some point.
Very diplomatic.
No, it's not diplomatic. It's if I said we're not doing it, Dan will immediately try to find a way to do it. So.
All right. So I think we've covered everything at this point. I was thinking it might be nice to just hear from the three of you in terms of, as we look forward to 2018, things that you think, were done really well in 2017 that you want to keep doing looking forward, and things that, we've learned from in 2017 that we want to change moving forward. John, you want to kick us off? Does that sound like a plan?
Sure. I think things that have gone well, on the design side, I think the new decks have integrated well and smoothly. And I'm particularly fond of Mako as a deck you can hand to someone who barely understands the game, and they can play it competently pretty quickly. And I think that's a good accomplishment on a lot of levels, that it's not a boring deck, it's not a bad deck, but it is a deck that can be simple. And so I think that was some really good design there. And I mean, the Vulcans may do the same thing, I just haven't had a chance to play with them yet. But the fact that the Vulcans are being played speaks well to those types of design issues. More locally on the rules level, I think we've done a pretty good job of being responsive to the rules issues that have come out and trying to respond to them quickly. As for things we can do better, the Promise Rulebook 2.0 needs to happen and be finished, and that's entirely on me. I take full accountability for slowing down that process. And yeah, that's probably the big one over here, is just taking care of the rules cleanup. Related to that, I will be posting this on the boards probably later today, but as part of the yearly glossary consolidation, if there are glossary issues or rules issues that you do not think have been adequately responded to, please let me know so they can be included.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Pat?
From a creative perspective, I think the year's gone smoothly. The transition from Dave to myself. Dave's still is on the team and is still contributing regularly. And we've got new additions on the team as well. And it's working pretty smoothly. I think we've been keeping all within Charlie's deadlines for projects over the year. From a design side, I was obviously very pleased with Broken Bow, Mako's, and my personal love is the capture Klingons, which are a good fun. It's nice to see that re-energized as a mechanic. Looking forward, I'm very much looking forward to the TNG starter reboots and what TOS block has to come as well. There's what we can do better. I think the main thing is we need to continue with our communication. All the teams talking with each other. That's the main priority.
Cheers. Thanks, Pat. Charlie?
Yeah, I saw a couple people commenting that 2017 wasn't a good year for 1E, and I honestly spent some time thinking about that last night. And if that's the impression that people have, then one of our biggest challenges is sort of figuring out how to get that feedback more often, because like we had like I said, we had a 1E staff meeting last week, and most of us were like, 2017 was a really good year. So if there are members of the community that are thinking 2017 was a terrible year, we need to figure out why. So that's obviously something that we can work on more often. I mean, it was not a perfect year, but we're looking to have put out 3 full expansions, because Cold Front is coming out soon. I guess it depends on whether you mark the actual release date or like the announcement date, because I don't think Cold Front will actually be released until January, but it's pretty close. So like that means we put out an entire block in a calendar year, basically, give or take, plus 2 boutique style expansions. That's pretty good. I think, communication has been improved. I think design is really kind of hitting it out of the park. 2018 is looking to be pretty great as well, with some cool new things at the start of the year and then kicking it into a new sort of block paradigm in the back half of the year. Behind the scenes, I think we have some work that we can improve on. We're getting a lot of... I think that we need to find a better way to strike the balance between volunteers having a say on things and then volunteers focusing on what they need to focus on. Like I don't want to name names, or I'm not going to, but like sometimes we'll get feedback from the rules team or the creative team that's like, this is a bad design decision. And I want to encourage people to have that opportunity to do that, but when they're in the midst of like doing a creative review or a rules review, I want to hear about rules issues, not I personally disagree with what you're doing. So I think we need to find a way to let the volunteers have that, but not at the expense of their focus. I think that there has been some tension between design and playtesting. We haven't really talked about it in the public much, but I think we're kind of over the hump on that. But obviously, it's something that we have to sort of keep working on. We need to make sure the playtesters are engaged and feel that they're respected, and we need to make sure the designers feel that the playtesters are giving honest and open feedback and not pushing agendas. So more open communication, I think, will help on all of those fronts. Looking forward to 2018. I think anything that we had any issues with in 2017, I think we're all aware of and upfront about, and we already have plans in place to address. So it's just going to be rolling with the punches and adapting and keeping engaged and keeping informed.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of myself, just a big thank you. Really appreciate the engagement, the transparency of answering all the questions, regardless of the content, and looking forward to a great 2018 as well. So, talk to you all later.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Cheers, Alan.
Cheers. Bye.